That moment when the sound of a slap echoed across the hall with 130 guests watching. My entire life shifted in a single second. His hand had struck my cheek, but the deeper wound was the silence that followed. The laughter stopped, the music stuttered, the glasses froze halfway to lips. And my own daughter, she did not move, did not speak, did not protect me. Hello, Revenge with John family. Before we dive into this story, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. My name is Latoya. I am 68 years old. People have always thought of me as a simple woman who lives in quiet corners, who wears the same old dresses and drives a car that should have been retired decades ago. They see the wrinkles, the gray hair, the flower shop apron I still tie around my waist some mornings, and they think they know me. But they don't. Tonight, at my daughter's wedding, I saw the truth of everything laid bare. Malik, my son-in-law, stood in front of me, his face twisted with anger. He demanded my car keys. Not asked, demanded. His voice cut through the chatter, a sharp blade slicing through celebration. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. That surely, on the happiest day of his life, he would not humiliate me in front of every guest. But when I told him calmly, "No, Malik, you cannot take my car," his hand struck faster than I could even gasp. The sting of his palm burned across my skin, but what burned more was Naomi's silence. My daughter, the one I had carried and raised, looked away. She pressed her lips together, as if she were the one suffering. She did not speak for me. She did not shield me. She let her husband humiliate me, as if I were nothing more than furniture in the hall. The hall was drenched in silence. I could hear the champagne fizzing in the untouched glasses, the shuffling of uncomfortable shoes, the whispers starting like a storm at sea. Every eye bore into me, not into Malik. They watched me, waiting to see if I would crumble, if I would lower my head like a servant, if I would hand him the keys just to make the embarrassment stop. But I stood still. My cheek burned, but my spine did not bend. For 68 years, I had lived with restraint. I had played the role of the quiet mother, the widow who tended her flowers, the neighbor who asked for nothing. I had allowed the world to underestimate me. I had let people believe I was small. Even my own family thought my worth could be measured in old clothes and second-hand cars. But they did not know that every wrinkle on my face was carved from years of endurance. They did not know that behind the counter of that flower shop, I managed investments worth more than anyone in this hall could imagine. They did not know that I had paid for Naomi's college tuition, Malik's gambling debts, their rent, their food, their endless needs. They did not know because I never told them. I thought kindness was enough. I thought sacrifice was love. But in that moment, cheek burning, guests staring, daughter silent, I realized kindness had been mistaken for weakness. Malik smirked, as though he had won some invisible game. He extended his hand again, palm up, waiting for me to drop my keys into it. Naomi's eyes flickered toward him, then away from me. My heart felt heavier than stone. I did not give him the keys. I turned, my heels clicking against the polished floor, and I walked out. Behind me, the whispers grew louder, like the rustle of judgmental leaves in a poisoned wind. Some guests pitied me, others mocked me, but none understood. None knew that as I stepped into the night air, I was not leaving defeated. I was leaving to make a call. Outside, the cool night wrapped around me. My hands shook, but not from fear. No, fear had left me long ago. These tremors came from something else, something long buried that was waking now. A fire. A storm. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had not used in years, though I knew it by heart. The line clicked. A steady, calm voice answered. "Carlos," I whispered, my voice trembling but sharp, "it's time." For a moment, silence lingered. Then he replied, "Do you want me to bring everything?" "Yes," I said. My reflection in the glass door of the hall showed me the truth of myself. An old woman, yes, but no longer a silent one. Bring every paper, every receipt, every transfer. Tonight, they will learn who I really am. I ended the call, tucked the phone into my bag, and inhaled deeply. The night smelled of roses, faint from the bouquets I had once delivered to others. But tonight it was different. Tonight, the roses were for me. Inside that hall, Malik thought he had broken me. Naomi thought her silence was protection for her husband. but they had no idea what I carried. And when I walked back in, 30 minutes later, I would no longer be the quiet mother they could humiliate. I would be Latoya. And I would never be silent again. When I stepped away from that hall and ended the call with Carlos, I didn't go straight home. I found myself walking slowly down the quiet street, the sound of my shoes echoing against the pavement. Every step carried the weight of years, decades, of silence. I had always believed that silence was protection, that enduring without protest was noble. But tonight had ripped that illusion from me. For years, I had kept my true life hidden. People saw the woman in second-hand dresses, the one who drove an old car, the one who clipped coupons and carried grocery bags with tired arms. They did not see the bank accounts, the properties, the careful investments that Robert and I had built before he passed. They did not know about the quiet empire I had guarded like a secret garden. Even Naomi didn't know. Especially Naomi. I kept it from her because I thought shielding her from wealth would keep her grounded. I wanted her to value effort, to understand responsibility. But instead, she had chosen a man like Malik, loud, arrogant, reckless. And I had paid for their choices. Again and again. I remembered the first time Malik came to me, 2 years ago, with fear in his eyes and debt in his voice. He begged me for help, swore he would repay me. Naomi pleaded with me too, promising it was temporary. I wrote the check. And when the next crisis came, I paid again. And again. I told myself I was protecting my daughter, not enabling him. But deep inside I knew the truth. I was feeding the very fire that would one day burn me. Tonight, the fire had finally scorched my skin. Half an hour later, I heard Carlos's car pull up beside me. He stepped out, tall, calm, the same way he had always been since Robert first trusted him with our financial matters. In his hands were 2 leather briefcases, heavy with documents. "Are you certain?" he asked quietly. I looked at him, my cheeks still burning from the slap, and nodded. "I've been certain for years. I just didn't have the courage to show it." We walked back to the hall together. I could feel the hum of voices inside as we reached the door. Guests were still talking about the slap, I knew it. Malik was probably laughing, Naomi probably pretending everything was fine. They thought I had left in shame. They thought I had been defeated. But I had returned with truth. The doors opened, and heads turned. Whispers swept across the room like wind through dry grass. I held my head high, even though my heart pounded so hard it shook my chest. Carlos followed me, the briefcases in his hands, his expression unreadable but steady. Malik's smirk froze when he saw me. Naomi's eyes widened, shining with confusion and fear. I walked to the center of the hall, the place where brides dance and toasts are made, and I stood there as though it were a courtroom. Carlos set the briefcases on a table. He clicked one open, the sound sharp in the silence, and pulled out a thick stack of papers. He placed his glasses on his nose and began to read. "Over the past 5 years," he said clearly, "Mrs. Latoya has covered the following expenses for Mr. Malik and Mrs. Naomi." The room hushed. The list began. The outstanding balance on Malik's gambling debt in 2019, paid in full by Mrs. Latoya. The mortgage arrears on their apartment, cleared entirely by Mrs. Latoya. The tuition fees Naomi could not afford, paid by Mrs. Latoya. Wedding arrangements guaranteed by Mrs. Latoya's accounts. Every line struck like thunder in the hall. Guests leaned closer, gasping, whispering, covering their mouths. Naomi's face turned pale, then red, then pale again. Malik clenched his fists at his sides, his jaw working, his smirk gone. I watched them both, my heart strangely calm now. I was no longer the victim of a slap. I was the revealer of truth. When Carlos finished reading, he placed the papers on the table like evidence. Then he stepped back, leaving the silence to me. I looked at Malik first. His eyes darted, searching for a way out, for some excuse, some defense. Then I looked at Naomi. She shook her head, tears brimming, lips trembling as though she wanted to apologize, but the words refused to come. I straightened my back. "Kindness," I said slowly, letting each word fall heavy into the air, "is not weakness. But when you confuse the two, you will pay the price." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed, guests capturing the moment they would talk about for years. I did not flinch. That night, in the middle of my daughter's wedding, I did what I had been too afraid to do for decades. I unveiled the truth. And this was only the beginning. When the murmurs settled into a brittle quiet, Malik finally found his voice. "This is a wedding," he barked, pointing at the papers as if he could stab holes in numbers with his finger. "You're trying to embarrass us. None of that matters tonight." Carlos didn't flinch. "What matters is accuracy," he said, calm as rain. "And these records are precise. Signatures, dates, wire confirmations, and statements from 3 institutions. You may contest them later, but facts don't wait for your permission." Malik turned to Naomi, expecting her to stand beside him like a shield. She didn't move. The makeup artist had promised Naomi a long-wearing mascara. It wasn't built for this. Her eyes were glossy, her lips trembling, her whole body stuck somewhere between defending her husband and recognizing the size of the hand that had fed them all this time. I watched the moment understanding pushed against denial on her face, and won a small, painful victory. A guest in the second row whispered, "Too loud to be private. He slapped his mother-in-law and she's been paying their bills?" Another voice answered, "She paid for this wedding?" The words spread like dye in water. I stepped forward. "Yes. I guaranteed the venue. I guaranteed the band. I guaranteed the flowers. I let my gaze rest on Malik's. I guaranteed you would not fail in public. You repaid me by trying to make me fail in public." He laughed then, dry, performative. "You're old and bitter. You want control. You want to own us." I didn't raise my voice. I wanted my daughter safe. I wanted to believe you would grow into the man you claimed to be. I paused. Men who are truly strong don't need to humiliate older women to feel tall. A few guests clapped before catching themselves. The bandleader, trapped on stage with his trumpet in hand, stared at Malik with the expression of a man reconsidering every unpaid gig he'd ever accepted. The venue manager edged closer, palms together, eyes darting between me and Carlos. He had the look of someone doing fast math in his head, while smiling for the camera. "Mrs. Latoya," he said carefully, "our office appreciates your guarantee. We have your card on file. Is everything continuing as agreed?" "Not yet," I said. "But it depends on whether I remain welcome as a guest." Malik snapped. "You can leave. That's best for everyone." The manager turned pale. "Sir, she is the guarantor on." Carlos cleared his throat. A small sound that cut like a gavel. "Per Mrs. Latoya's discretion, any future charges under her guarantee require real-time approval." He lifted a document with a fresh, wet signature. "Effective now." The manager nodded so fast I feared he'd pull a muscle. "Of course. We'll route anything through you, ma'am." He retreated with the urgent gait of a man who had just remembered a very important task in the kitchen. Malik tried a different tactic. Charm curdled into sarcasm. "Fine. You paid a few bills. That doesn't give you the right to ruin our night." "Ruin?" I tilted my head. "You made your choice when you put your hand on my face. I'm simply making sure the lights are bright enough for everyone to see." He stepped toward me, and 2 groomsmen instinctively shifted. Not toward him but in front of me, men who had laughed at his jokes 15 minutes earlier. "Don't," one of them said quietly. "Not again." Naomi finally spoke. "Malik, stop." The room heard the crack inside her voice. She was looking at my cheek. The mark had darkened, a quiet bruise blooming under the ballroom lights. When her eyes lifted to mine, they were full of the sort of apology that can't stand on its own legs yet. "Mom," she whispered, and winced at the weight of that word. I nodded once. "You'll have time to decide who you are," I told her gently. "But tonight tells me who I am." I turned to the crowd, every face lit by equal parts curiosity and shame. I am not a purse to be emptied. I am not a wall you can lean on without asking if the bricks are still sound. I am a woman who has loved past sense and given past reason. I placed a hand over the papers. And I am done being taken for granted. A phone camera rose in the 3rd row. Others followed like flowers tracking the sun. It didn't bother me. This story would not survive in the dark. Carlos opened the second briefcase and lifted out a slim folder. "For avoidance of doubt," he said, "there are letters here addressed to vendors and to your landlord, Mr. Malik." Each clarifies the source of payments made on your behalf. Each is notarized. Each can be verified. Additionally, there is a documented pattern of withdrawals from Mrs. Latoya's accounts correlating to your debts, overtime, and discretionary expenses. He eyed Malik's shoes gleaming and new. Some discretionary. Malik's voice skidded into something smaller. You said you would help. I did help, I replied. Help is a bridge, not a house. You were meant to cross it, not move in. He swallowed. So what now? You expect us to grovel? To kiss your ring? I expect you to learn, I said. And I expect consequences to keep their appointments. The DJ, paralyzed for 10 minutes, cleared his throat into a dead microphone and put it down again. The room breathed as one creature. Inhale, hold, wait for the verdict. I picked up my handbag from the table, the old leather soft as memory. I will not drag this further tonight. The guests came for a wedding, not a court case. I glanced at the clock above the bar. In 30 minutes I will leave. Until then, the band will play, the cake will be cut, and Naomi will have the photograph she hoped for. No one deserves a ruined album. I faced Malik. But hear me. You will never speak to me the way you did. You will never raise your hand to me again. And you will never touch my keys. Something in him lurched, anger searching for a doorway and finding none. He looked for allies and found only faces. Even the loudest men in his orbit were suddenly very interested in their napkins. Naomi touched the hem of her dress and steadied herself. Mom, she said, voice measured now. Thank you for everything you've done. I didn't know. She glanced at Malik, and the distance between them, though only inches, looked like a road with no return sign. I didn't know, she repeated, and this time it sounded like a sentence, not an excuse. I thought of all the times I had softened truth to spare her. Tonight, I let truth stand upright. A small, brave thing happened then. The maid of honor walked over with a compact and quietly pressed a cool pad to my cheek. For swelling, she whispered. It was not much, and it was everything. The hall exhaled. Carlos checked his watch. Shall I proceed with the notices? He murmured. After the cake, I said. Let the music cover the sound of endings beginning. He gave the faintest smile. As you wish. The band, grateful for instruction, launched into a gentle standard. Couples rose. The motion of dancing disguised the motion of choosing sides. I stood at the edge of the floor and watched my daughter cut the cake with a man who had tried to reduce me to an object. Each slice was clean, practiced, rehearsed. Not everything rehearsed deserves a stage. When the photographer raised his camera, Naomi lifted her eyes to me. For a heartbeat, time bent. The girl who brought me dandelion crowns at 6, the teenager who slammed doors at 16, the bride who was deciding, at this very table, who she would be at 60. I did not smile. I did not look away. I gave her the one gift I had never offered so clearly, my boundaries. As promised, 30 minutes later, I picked up my shawl. The room turned as if tugged by a thread. I met Malik's stare, and held it until he blinked. Then I spoke for the last time that night. Kindness is not weakness, I said, letting every syllable land. Actions have consequences. I walked toward the exit, and 2 groomsmen stepped aside to open the door. The night air met me like an ally. Outside, under the dim lights of the portico, Carlos handed me a pen. One more signature, he said, producing a simple document. Authorization to suspend any further guarantees pending your explicit consent. I signed. The ink settled like a seal. Tomorrow, he asked. Tomorrow, I said. We finished the rest. We stood there listening to the muffled music and distant applause. A ceremony continuing on its rails while the tracks ahead quietly shifted. Behind us, a celebration. Before us, a reckoning. I felt no triumph, only clarity. The clean, cool kind that comes after a storm when you can finally see the shape of the damage, and the shape of your own spine. I tucked the pen away. Drive me home, Carlos. I have a will to review. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a verdict. My cheek still carried the bruise, a dull reminder of Malik's hand, but what pressed heavier was the clarity of what had to be done. For years, I had lived as if generosity could erase entitlement. For years, I had believed that giving would build gratitude. Instead, it had built greed. Carlos arrived with a folder under his arm. He set it on the kitchen table without ceremony. "I've drafted revisions," he said. I opened the folder and saw my life rewritten in black ink. My will, my trusts, my beneficiaries. Every page detailed the future I had once imagined for Naomi, now revised for reality. When Robert and I built our nest egg, we had always said it would be a safety net for our daughter. But a net can strangle as easily as it saves, if used by the wrong hands. Naomi had let Malik use it until there was nothing left of her independence. If I continued, I would not be saving her. I would be erasing her. I signed page after page. The ink was steady, not trembling. Most of the estate would go to charities, to scholarships, to the community center where children came after school because their homes were too empty. A portion would go to Rosa and Joseph, neighbors who had shown me loyalty in ways money could never buy. For Naomi, I left something different. A conditional trust. One that would only open if she demonstrated responsibility, not dependence. It was not punishment. It was a mirror. She could decide what she wanted to see when she looked into it. Later that day, Carlos and I visited the lawyer's office. I walked past the receptionist, past the polished floors, into the conference room where official seals waited. When the final stamp fell, a weight slid off my shoulders, one I hadn't even realized I carried. For the first time in decades, I knew that my future, and Robert's legacy, was safe from those who saw me as a wallet instead of a woman. News of the wedding incident had already spread. Videos from guests leaked online, shared in hushed tones and bold headlines. Mother of the bride humiliated. Elderly woman slapped at daughter's wedding. But also, she revealed their secrets. The world was watching, and for once, I didn't shrink from it. Malik tried to control the story, of course. He told relatives I had staged everything, that Carlos was manipulating me. He raised his voice in interviews, pretending outrage. But the papers Carlos had read aloud were undeniable. And the internet has no appetite for liars exposed under chandeliers. His business contacts began to vanish. The landlord who had once relied on my payments now demanded Malik's signature on overdue rent. The car he boasted about was repossessed within a week. Naomi called me 3 times that week. I didn't answer the first 2. On the third, I let the phone ring in my hand before pressing it to my ear. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracked. "I don't know what to do." I closed my eyes. I wanted to tell her everything, to rescue her again, to gather her in my arms like the child she had been. But children grow into adults, and adults must choose. "You will figure it out," I said. "That is the only way you will ever stand without leaning." She cried quietly, waiting for me to bend. I did not. That evening, Rosa came by with fresh bread. She had seen the videos, too, and she held me as though I had been the one walked down the aisle. "They forgot who you are," she said simply. "Now they'll remember." I looked at the bruise in the mirror that night, fading but still visible. It no longer felt like shame. It felt like evidence. A scar in the making, but scars tell stories that skin alone cannot. By the end of that week, the calls from creditors reached Malik faster than Naomi could answer. Invitations dried up. The couple who had once walked with pride now walked with whispers trailing behind them. Naomi still sent me messages, short fragments of guilt. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. Please can we talk?" I did not refuse her. But I did not rush to her either. She needed to see, in the hollow of Malik's promises and the echo of my absence, that actions always return home. One night, I sat with Joseph and Rosa on the porch, watching the streetlights flicker. "Do you regret it?" Joseph asked. I sipped my tea, feeling the steam warm my face. "No," I said. "For the first time I don't." And I meant it. I had not taken revenge. I had taken justice. There is a difference. Revenge seeks to destroy. Justice seeks to restore. What I had restored was not only my control, but my dignity. The next chapter of my life was waiting, and for once, I was eager to meet it. The first Sunday after everything, I walked to church alone. People who had once barely noticed me now turned their heads as I entered. Some gave me pity, others admiration, but all of them knew. Word travels quickly when an old woman refuses to bow. I did not seek their approval. Yet I carried myself taller, as if the bruise on my cheek had become a crown. Naomi came to see me a week later. She stood on my porch in the same dress she had worn to a rehearsal dinner, only this time it looked wilted, as though it carried the weight of sleepless nights. Malik was not with her. I opened the door and let her in, but I did not embrace her. She sat at the table where Carlos and I had signed away her easy future. Her hands shook as they wrapped around a mug of tea I placed before her. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling, "I didn't stand up for you. I let him hurt you. And I said nothing." I watched her carefully. She was not making excuses. She was confessing. "I don't want his debts anymore," she whispered. "I don't want to live like this. I want to work. I want to earn." Tears filled her eyes, but they did not move me to undo what I had written into law. Instead, I nodded. "Then prove it. No one can give you strength. You have to build it." She left with her shoulders hunched but her steps heavier, like a child finally carrying her own bag. It was the first honest moment between us in years. Days passed, and I found peace in small things. Rosa invited me to her garden, where we planted tulips that would bloom long after I was gone. Joseph repaired the creaking step on my porch without asking for payment. These gestures were not transactions. They were care freely given, and I realized I had mistaken obligation for love too many times in my life. Meanwhile, Malik unraveled. The man who once shouted at waiters now avoided public places. Creditors found him. Employers hesitated to hire him. He tried to cling to Naomi, but she began to pull away, thread by thread, until he was left clutching only himself. I did not gloat. I did not need to. Consequences have their own voice. One evening, I sat at my desk and began to write. Not checks, not receipts, not ledgers. I wrote my story. Every detail, every choice, every silence, and every awakening. I wrote for the women who had been told to stay quiet, for the mothers whose sacrifices became invisible, for the elders treated as burdens instead of roots. I wanted them to know that even after 68 years of being underestimated, it is never too late to stand. When my writing was finished, I shared parts of it with the community center. They read it aloud to younger generations, and I saw their eyes widen. For the first time, I felt my life was more than a ledger of debts and payments. It was a testament. Naomi visited again months later. She had taken a job at a bookstore, a modest place that smelled of paper and dust. She came wearing an apron smeared with ink and pride. "I paid my own rent this month," she said. There was no plea in her tone, only fact. That fact meant more than any apology. I touched her hand. "Good," I said softly. "Keep going." That night, alone in bed, I thought of Robert. I wondered if he would approve of what I had done. I imagined his smile, the one that always told me I was braver than I believed. For the first time in years, I slept without dreaming of debts. The bruise on my cheek had faded by then, but it lived forever in memory. Not as a mark of humiliation, but as the spark that lit everything after. I am not just Latoya, the widow who sold flowers and drove an old car. I am Latoya, who chose to reveal, to act, to protect the dignity of her name. Kindness is not weakness. Actions have consequences. And my story, now, belongs to anyone who needs the reminder that silence is not the same as peace.